Well, all right, let's open our Bibles this morning to the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 11, verse 1. We are only three studies away from finishing this book that we spent several months in. Solomon, as king, was given by God a wisdom that no man had ever had, this kind of wisdom, nor after him either. The Lord said of Solomon's wisdom, and he was given this wisdom from God to rule the people well. If you've read the book of Proverbs, you realize that early on that wisdom of God in Solomon's life certainly showed as he gave his son instructions on walking in the ways of the Lord. Unfortunately for Solomon, at least in his mid-years or towards the end of his life, he went astray. He got involved in lots of marriages where women were bringing their false gods to bear, and his heart was turned from the one true living God. And Solomon is set on a quest, setting aside the wisdom of God really in many ways. He tried to figure out if there was life in the world, hope in the world, or there's purpose in the world, without having God involved in your life in this world, without having that life of obedience and faith. And Solomon used his authority as king to pursue without interruption those goals. He had enough wealth at his disposal to hunt without constraint. And this book, the word Ecclesiastes means to gather things. Is a result of his observations and his frustrations and his insights. And he used, all that he had to try to find if there's life out there anywhere, a purpose without God. And he came up empty. Every road that he went down, he wrote down. Every expectation that didn't pan out, he wrote down. He extensively participated in and then observed the world and just said his big word, vanity. It's a word that means, what's left over when everything is said and done? And the answer is nothing. Well, as we get closer to the end, as Solomon, fortunately in chapter 12, goes back to where he started, hopefully more committed than ever, and certainly his last days of walking with the Lord were faithful. He gives us some observations that I think are very helpful, and he's kind of back on track. So this morning in 6 verses 1 through 6, we're going to look at what he has to say to us about diligence. If you've ever wanted to find motivation for your Christian life, I think these verses will give it to you. If you want to find a great joy in serving, read these. If you want to find a formula for being fruitful or having a mindset of a believer that is trusting in God, then I think these verses are absolutely for you, and they present themselves easily. The truths are easy to understand, but absolutely phenomenal in their insight. So let's read the verses, and then we'll kind of go over them together. Solomon writes in verse 1 of chapter 11, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a serving to 7, also to 8, for you do not know what evil will be upon the earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. If you observe the wind, you will not sow. If you regard the clouds, you will not reap. And how do you know what is the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child? So you do not know the work of God, who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed. In the evening don't withhold your hand, for you do not know what will prosper, whether it is this or that, or whether both alike will be good." Notice that Solomon, in his observation of life under the sun in the world, notice that sometimes, due to either real or imagined difficulty, or even sometimes anticipated difficulty, that people will seek to excuse themselves from action, to excuse themselves, instead doing nothing at all because of what they might face. Solomon uses the example of a merchant ship that is going out to the sea with a valuable cargo on board, not really knowing how the seas will go. He uses the illustration of a farmer whose livelihood is found in sowing and reaping to illustrate the point that if the farmer, like the merchant at sea, regards the circumstances in which his work has to be done, he will end up losing everything. When it is time to sow, because the wind is blowing and the seeds carry it away, he'll just decide he's not going to sow. When it is time to reap and it looks like clouds and he anticipates rain, he might not go into the fields to gather together the crops. Yet all of those conditions, the high or the rough seas, the weather challenges, are a given. Notice what the Lord says in verse 3, or verse 3, and especially verse 3. He said, look, things are going to happen. Rain comes out of, clouds. Dead trees, they lay where they fall. And the works of faith are always having to be accomplished in less than ideal circumstances, but the excuses for not sowing will eventually become the explanation for not reaping. And really, that's what Solomon says here. The principle is true in everything that we undertake in life. Cast your bread upon the waters. It'll come back later. Spread it around to 7 or to 8. You don't know or can't anticipate the problems you might face. But then he says in verse 3, look, life is like that. There are things that are just unchangeable, and certainly difficult circumstances is one of them. But if you observe them, you're not going to get anything done. So, since you don't know God's ways, verse 5, you should just be sowing in the morning and reaching out in the evening, because you really don't know what God's going to bless. One, both, all alike, we don't know. But the danger, the lesson is in verse 4 and in verse 1. Cast, don't find reason not to, and look to the Lord to bring the fruit. It's the issue, and it's repeated here over and over. Everything that you do in life and that I do has some kind of inherent danger with it. And if you don't face them, you're going to be fruitless, and your life is going to really be meaningless in many ways. Statistics tell us that 20% of people in the U.S. that die will die of heart disease. 1 out of 7 will die of cancer. 1 out of 23 will die of a stroke. Every 30 minutes, someone on a U.S. road gets killed by a drunk driver. That's just the numbers. I suspect that hasn't kept any of you off the road or caused you to change your life much in terms of driving, and it probably shouldn't, but it's absolutely statistics that you need to be aware of. We all know that air travel is far safer than driving, and yet the same people that will climb in the car without concern, driving way too fast, texting their friends and loading up pictures onto Facebook while they're driving, dread flying due to the perceived danger. Oh man, could die in a plane. Or you can't, or you don't. In fact, if you look at the statistics of those who die in air travel, you are far more likely to die of drowning or of electrocution or just falling down and hitting your head. You're afraid to fly, stay out of the bathtub. That kills a lot of people. The best thing you can do if you're that worried is do nothing. Just sit really still. But we don't do that. I use these statistics with my wife when I'm tired and sitting on the couch and I'm out of tea. I'd say, honey, I don't want to risk my life to get up. Could you just bring me a refill? Of course, most of us live without succumbing to these obvious fears of potential risks, remote as they are, because you have to live. Unfortunately, as believers, sometimes when the Lord gets entered into the equation, what should bring us peace doesn't. Look, there's risk in life. There's even less risk to me because I realize that God's in charge of my life. And so that it diminishes the remoteness of danger because I figure that God's going to direct my every step. And so I rest in his care. But what often happens to us as believers is though we are willing to take necessary risks for the things we enjoy, and, well, whatever happens because we want to do it, when it comes to the Lord causing us to trust him or we're called to him or he has something for us to do, oftentimes, unfortunately, we employ the verse 4 philosophy of observing the wind and the clouds, even using the flimsiest of excuses why we can't step out in faith to obey his call. God's not calling us to be unwise. A wise person acknowledges the potential difficulty in the challenges he faces, but he usually sees them as a goal on the other side, a reward to overcome. The guy that that sails across the ocean is aware of the fact he's going to run into a storm or two. The pilot who pilots, a 747, which weighs almost 1 million pounds at takeoff, if he's flying across the country, he's aware of the fact that, he's going to run into some storms, some turbulence, but it's expected, and it's certainly not going to change his way of life. You drive on California freeways if you live here. That's a risk in itself. Well, what about when we step out and serve the Lord? Today we have a virus. Okay, there's problems with it. We should be careful, but at the same time, it can easily become an excuse to do nothing. Can't get out of the house, can't get to church, can't call somebody to share, just shut you down completely for the last 6 months. Is that really the way God would have you to respond? I'm amazed at, as I read these verses, the fact that we would need to be encouraged at all to set aside all of our cares and serve the Lord with everything that we have. He loves us more than you know. And we know that no fruit comes from our lives unless we're willing to step out. Maybe it's just selfishness. We're so self-driven. The smallest package in the world is a person who's wrapped up in himself. Self-motivated, self-help, self-reliant, self-esteem, do it for me. It's all about self. And so because of that, we don't really want to risk when it comes to serving. And yet these verses would very clearly say, since you don't know what God's up to or how he works, hey man, put everything you've been given out there and let's see what the Lord will do with it. Chuck's greatest line to us as young pastoral students at Costa Mesa years ago was, let's go see what God will do. Because you don't know until you step out. But you can cast what God's given you out there and cast a wide net, and let's see what the Lord will do, because there's always going to be obstacles. It's the way of life. I know that personalized license plates are a big deal these days. A lot of people have them. What you might not know is many years ago when they first came out, they were first issued in Illinois. And they were, on the day that they were issued, they only had 1,000 people apply for them, but they all applied for number 1. Just a bunch of zeros and 1. That was it. They wanted to be number 1. In fact, the fellow that was in charge of issuing the licenses in an interview afterwards said to his interviewer, I really didn't want to be the one who disappointed so many people who wanted to get number 1 and they couldn't get it, that I decided I would just keep it for myself. Well, what a good guy. What a big helper. But look, that's not a new problem. That problem started years earlier in the Garden of Eden when Satan encouraged Adam and Eve to apply for that same license. I want to be number 1. In fact, it even happened far before that when Lucifer, a created angel that was in charge of worship around the throne of God, decided that he would apply in person to be number 1. He wanted to sit where the Lord sit in the sides of the north, be worshipped as God. It's been going on in every successive generation. Years ago, I heard a story from a fellow. I know they don't have them much anymore, but they used to outside, like a lot of department stores, have these little horses that would go back and forth, and you put your kids on and put a quarter in, and they'd be riding horses. So there was a lady that put her boy and a daughter, both of them, only had 1 quarter, together on the little ride thing, and she put the quarter in. But they were pretty crowded on there, and that little boy said to his sister, if one of us would get off of here, there'd be more room for me. And I thought, well, that's exactly the way that we often live. Now, that doesn't stop when you get to be a kid. That grows. That's the sin that follows Adam and Eve as well into our hearts. We want to be first in the parking lot, out the door, in the movie theater, off the plane. Just be first. I don't know if you've ever driven and finally your lane clears and you're heading for the light and some guy kind of pulls up in front of you and you go, oh, now I'm second. Somehow not so much fun. Solomon was number 1 for years. He had it all. He searched for life without God being number 1, and he didn't find it to be very successful, very satisfying. So here's a solution. The solution is overcome self, let God use you, serve, risk, be adventurous, do so in faith. Let's see what God will do. Notice in verse 1 he uses the word cast. It's a word that means to throw out. It is usually using the word to speak about generosity, whether it's money or time. It's an open hand kind of policy, because that's God's heart, that we as his people would be willing to take what he's given us and put it out there for his use. When Moses was meeting with the children of Israel before he handed them off to Joshua in chapter 15 of Deuteronomy, he said to them, when you go into the land and you find someone that is poor among you, don't harden your heart, don't shut your hand, but open it wide and be willing to meet his need, be sufficient for his needs. It's that same concept of casting, if you will, your bread upon the waters. The idea here is giving out with full confidence what God has given you, so that he will use it, because on the water just kind of floats away. It's out of your control. He promises one day to have you see the fruit of your willingness to cast it out. And in fact, he even says, widen your investments. Give it to 7. No, give it to 8. Now, that's Hebrew poetry, right? Escalating numbers is kind of like the equivalent in English of putting an exclamation point behind a saying. They don't have that in Hebrew. So, hey, just invest all that you have. Let the Lord have it. You don't know how it's going to turn out, but you also don't know what evil is coming. So lay it out there. Do it, verse 6, in the morning, in the evening. You don't know what God's going to bless. You don't have that information, but you do have a calling to lay it out there before the Lord. That's what he would have us to do. Cast it out. Now, that's easier said than done. When it comes to money, money is like grabbing an electrical wire. The more the juice, the stronger the hold on you. Paul spent a lot of time in Gentile churches gathering money for the poor in Jerusalem. They didn't appreciate it much, but he thought it was his duty. When he wrote to the Corinthian letter, if you read 2 Corinthians chapter 9, he spent a whole chapter talking about what motivated him to bring the monies and support from these smaller Gentile churches scattered abroad to the poor in Jerusalem. And one of the things he said was, look, if you're just going to sow sparingly, that's how you'll reap. But you can reap bountifully if you sow bountifully. And the principle isn't, missed on us. God's interest is in a cheerful giver, that a heart wants to be used by God. He's able to make all grace towards you, so you'll always have everything you need. But it's that same issue. Now, these verses here go way beyond finances, way beyond, portfolios, if you want. Just put yourself out there. Use what God has given you. Reach out with what he has set before you. The principle is putting it out there. And here's the danger, and here's his warning. You can always find reasons to not do it. I'm not going to help that guy. He hasn't worked in a month. I don't trust him. I'm not going to extend myself. And in the same way, we do it in 100 other things that the Lord has called us to do. The counsel is simple. Cast it forth, and you'll only discover what God wants to do with it in verse 6 if you can get by verse 4, which is cast it forth and don't find any excuses to not do so. Don't find any reasons to put it off. Our calling from God in verse 6 is to carry forth his work without being slowed down or dissuaded by either the wind or the cloud. It is God's business, it is God's problem to take what you have sown in terms of service and bring a harvest. He is the Lord of the harvest. Now here's the problem. It is usually our work that's left undone. His never is. He's always faithful. But this same truth of adventure and obedience without excuse can be applied in literally every position and place in our life. To do nothing with reasonable excuses, to forget God can take our best, as poor as it might be, and make much fruit out of it, is to leave a Christian just sitting in the pew, never moving. Let's take that principle and apply it to you sharing your faith. When was the last time you've talked to anyone about Jesus? When Jesus sat the disciples down there in Luke 8 and he told them the parable of the sower, he said, the seed is the word of God, and like that. When men go out to sow God's word, sometimes it falls on a very hard heart. It's like the wayside, and it can't penetrate. It's trampled down. The birds of the air come to eat or devour it. And he says, and sometimes it comes on stony ground, and he explained that. And sometimes just shallow ground. And finally he said, some hearts are just open, and they hear God's word, and man, it gets in there and bears a lot of fruit. And you read the parable and you go, well, Lord, that's great to know. It's like God pulled the curtains back and said, here's what I see in hearts when you go out to share. But then he puts the curtain back down. Now you have a job. Go tell all the world about Jesus. And you go, well, I don't know what kind of heart he has. Well, you don't know. God gave us an insight that there's a lot of stuff going on in people's hearts. But that doesn't and shouldn't slow you down from sharing, because you're called to go out and tell whoever will listen. There are plenty of people who will hesitate in sharing their faith with others because they've determined ahead of time that the person they want to talk to is unapproachable. Oh, they're too hard. They won't listen, And so what do? Rather than doing what Jesus says, casting their bread upon the waters, they observe the wind. Oh, they're stern. They look at the clouds. Oh, he's probably going to yell at me. And they decide, based upon their observation, just do nothing. I've decided to do nothing. I'll be rejected. They'll lash out. I'll suffer needlessly. They won't listen anyway. And in the end, I do exactly what the warning says they do, and we do nothing. Look, if the truth be known, most of you, before you were saved, were probably the same kind of unapproachable people, the ones voted less likely to come to Jesus. What is good is somebody who was praying for you and was willing to share with you were not put off by the circumstances, by the wind, by the waves, by the clouds, by the sea. They were willing to sow with the attitude, hey, let's see what God will do. But when you observe potential difficulty, it's a great deterrent to faith. When you observe God and his word, it's a great encouragement to faithful action. When David wrote in Psalm 126, those who go forth in tears to sow will certainly reap in joy, and those who continue to sow with much weeping, bearing seed that can be sown, will doubtlessly return or come again rejoicing, bringing the fruit, the sheaves, with them. All of that has to do with faith. I cast my bread. I believe God's word works. I don't consider the attitude of the hearer. I just share. My job is to tell. God's job is to save. I can't enter into his labors, but he certainly will enter into mine. The only thing that will shut me down is forgetting from verse 3 that life is like that. Things just happen. That's the way life is. A dead tree laying across a walkway will not move. In life in this world, you're going to have tribulation. But that should not slow down the work. The only thing that it'll do is if you start looking around going, well, the winds, the waves, the sea, you all hear, and all of a sudden you shut down. Sow at all costs. Do it in all kinds of soil, in all kinds of weather. Stop making excuses. If that's exactly what verse 4 says, we excuse ourselves. Apply this same truth to God's calling to ministry upon your life. Every one of you called to do something in the kingdom. My Bible says in 1 Corinthians 12 that we are one body that has a lot of parts. I don't know if you're an eyeball or an ear or a little toe stuck in a shoe. I don't know. But God has a purpose for you and a plan for you, and the body can't do well without you. But even there, I find people are confronted with this dreaded, verse 4, dilemma. They hear the Lord calling upon them to get involved, and they do this. Oh, I can't. Why not? I'm not really good at anything. I don't have the time. Might rain. And they do nothing. Excuse after excuse. Maybe next year when the kids are older, when the work slows down, when I have more time, when I feel better, when I know more. And the winds keep blowing. And all the while the Lord said, just take what you have, cast it on the waters. Because you don't know what God's going to do, and you don't know how God's going to work. So get busy morning and evening. Don't stop. Maybe the Lord wants you to teach a Sunday school this year. Or you can go with us to a convalescent home. We're still going on Sunday afternoons. We're meeting with folks outside. They can't wait to see you, to hear what the Lord can do. Or maybe you need to go on a missions trip somewhere. Oh, I can't travel days like that. Really? Is that what it is? And now we have the COVID issue. We've got another reasonable way to excuse ourselves from doing anything. Under the guise of being safe and protecting ourselves, we end up letting 6 months go by and do nothing, serve no one, reach out nowhere. Don't let the inevitable hamper you from serving the Lord. Look, a few loaves and fish in Jesus' hands fed thousands. It's not about you. It's about you trusting him. In fact, if you go back over these 6 verses and you look at verse 2 and verse 5 and verse 6, what you will read 3 times are the words, you don't know. You don't know. The future is uncertain. It is clouded. Life does not always go smoothly. Trees will fall. It's going to rain on your parade. You might be laid off. You might end up getting divorce papers. You might come up with an illness you didn't know you had. There are a lot of uncertainties for life. But God's work's got to continue in the lives of the saints, not in the world. The world's freaking out. And why wouldn't they? They don't know where to turn, but you do. Job lost his property, his children, his health, and the respect of his wife all in one day. Experiences that would have made a man in the world shut down and hide, but not the child of God. The tree is not going to move. The weather is going to continue to oppose you. So commit yourself to act in faith, even when the conditions aren't right, they're not conducive, they're not in your favor. Be careful that you're always excusing yourself. And then what happens is even more diabolical. You applaud yourself for having good intentions. Well, I would have done it, except, and then we fill in our excuse. But if we never consider, I should say, the potential difficulties, God can use us. So here's my counsel to you. Get out and get busy serving the Lord. Let God worry about the fruit. He doesn't ask you to bring forth fruit. He asks you to be faithful. When Martha and Mary lost Lazarus and Jesus didn't come for 3 days after he died, when news came that he was coming into town, Martha, in her anger and her type A personality, ran outside, ran down the street, went out and caught him outside the city limits and got into Jesus' face and said, look, if you'd have just been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Thanks for answering my prayers. And Jesus dealt with the one issue that's usually hardest for people, the finality of death. He said, your brother's going to live again. But that wasn't good enough for Martha. She was disappointed. She said, yes, all right, Lord, I know on the last day of the resurrection. And Jesus took her by the hands and loved her and said, look, Martha, I'm the resurrection and the life. If you believe in me, even if you die, you're going to live. And if you live believing in me, you'll never die. And then he added these very 6 important words. He says, Martha, do you believe that? Maybe that's 5 words. Anyway, you get the picture. And Martha said, yes, Lord, I believe that you're the promised one, the Savior, the one that was to come. And Jesus said something phenomenal to her. He says, then if you believe in me, come with me and I'll show you who I am. I'll show you my glory. And he headed for the graveyard. On the way, they picked Mary up along the way. She was also upset, but not so loud. When they got to the graveyard, Jesus said to the boys working there, hey, could you roll away the stone from the mouth of the grave of Lazarus? And Martha said, no, that's a bad idea, man. He's been in there a better part of a week. He's going to smell. And Jesus said, I thought I told you if you believe in me, I'll show you who I am. She was staggered by the fact he was dead. I think I might have been staggered by that as well. But that didn't slow Jesus down. When the Lord came into town on the feast day and he went down to the pools of Bethsaida down below the Temple Mount, where the people gathered every year, the sick, because there was a legend that whoever would, when the water was stirred, when the bubbles would come, whoever got in first would be healed. It had been perpetuated for a generation or more. People believed it. Was it true? I don't think so. No way to assure that that would be so. But Jesus went and he found a man there who had been lying there with that hope for 38 years. And what's phenomenal to me is the Lord said to him, "Would you like to be well?" And you want to think to yourself, the guy's going to go, "Yes, of course I will. I do." But instead, he doesn't say that. He begins to explain all of the clouds and all of the difficulty. He launches into a report of past winds. Well, every time the waters are stirred and I get help to get down there, by the time I get there, someone cuts me off and gets ahead of me. And he's just beginning to explain his lot rather than turning to the Lord. He observed the clouds, and the Lord doesn't say another word. He just says to him, "Just pick up your bed and walk." No more discussion. And cutting through all of the excuses, he brings life and purpose. Maybe the other side of the coin is that the story we have in Mark chapter 3 of Jesus arriving on a Sabbath day to the synagogue in Capernaum, where there was a man with a withered hand. He had an inability to move his hand. And the Lord looked at him and he gave him an order. He said to him, "Stretch out your hand." To which the guy might very well have replied, "You shouldn't pick on someone who's in this condition. You're picking on the handicapped. You're making fun of me." The Lord was just giving him an impossible command. But believing in him and who he was, he sought to obey what the Lord said. And as he did, God empowered him to do the impossible. And the man wasn't moved by the obstacle. He didn't observe the weather. He just listened to the Lord and acted accordingly and found his power. So what are we supposed to do in this kind of generation in which we live, where everybody is making excuses? Look, cast your bread on the water. Not to 7 or 8, just spread it around. God will bring it back to you, because there's inevitabilities in life that if you observe them, you'll end up doing nothing. But since you don't know how God's working, how about you just continue with what he gives you to do, and do it in the morning and do it at night, and then we'll find out what God's going to bless. Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Let's go see what the Lord will do. He can work by many or by few. Let's see what he wants to do." How adventurous is that when you can step out and say, "Hey, what the Lord's going to do?" Verse 4 mentality is oftentimes found even in our own personal growth. We decide to get up a few extra minutes in the morning to pray, and it isn't long before we start explaining how the clouds and the rain have slowed us down. "Oh, I can't sleep. I was up late. Whatever it's, my bad pillow, my back hurts. I can't." You decide to go to church other than on a Sunday morning, and you quickly find reasons why you can't. Rather than just saying, "I'm just going to go." It's been hard. There's rain, there's difficulty, there's wind. But don't let your flesh or your schedule keep you from what God wants you to do. Or verse 4 wins again. You remember the parable that Jesus told? It's in Luke, I think, chapter 14, where he said that the man who had made the great feast and it was ready said to his servant, "Go tell everyone that I've invited that the feast is ready." And he went out and he told them, but the first one he went to, he said to him, "Well, I've just bought a plot of land or a piece of ground. If you could just please excuse me, I won't be able to come." And he went to the second man who said, "I just bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I don't really know how they're going to work, so I have to go test them. Please have me excused." The third guy was just even more interesting. He just goes, "I just got married. I can't come." Blames his wife. Hear this. Whoosh. More wind, more rain to contend with. Jesus says when the servant came back to tell the master of their responses, he became angry. and said, go then quickly into the fields and into the streets and into the lanes and bring in the poor and the maimed and the lame and the blind. And he did. And then he said, Master, there's still room. He said, then go out into the highways and into the byways, into the hedges. Compel them to come in that my house could be filled. For I say to you, none of those men who were chosen and invited will taste of my supper. You wonder how long the Lord will put up with our excuses. But who goes by the field without seeing it? Any of you ever buy a house and didn't see it? Silly. Or buy some oxen that are supposed to work the farm? You better go see if they have 4 legs. Start with that. If they can pull in a straight line, if they're incorrigible or easy to work with. And who blames their wife? Wait a minute. We all blame our wives. The ones that were invited made excuses for themselves, and the very excuses they made kept them from God's best. Verse 4 will always lead to sin, will always lead to disobedience, will always keep you from what God wants to do. The potential difficulties that are imagined or real, our duty is just to sow. So do that. Quit making excuses for yourself. There's great value in being faithful, being a risk taker spiritually, an adventurer in the faith. Daniel wrote in chapter 11, verse 32, the people who know their God will be strong, and they will carry out great exploits. Isn't that what you want to do? Rather than in this generation shut down and throw up your arms and explain why you can't do anything, how about you step up and step out and explain how you'll do great things in the Lord as you trust Him, as you cast your bread upon the water. The excuses God's heard before. What He'd like to do with you, you'll only find as you step out. Father, this morning as we sit together, we thank you, Lord, for your word to us and your faithfulness to us in the fact that, God, you have more for us to do than so often we were willing to allow, because we get our eyes off of you and the fact that you bring the increase, and we get our eyes on ourselves or the difficulty of the task or the road ahead, and so we find ourselves compromising in diligence just because, we have lots of explanations. And yet Solomon kind of undermines all of those and said, let's just take what you have and lay it out there and let the Lord bring it back with fruit. But don't you not cast it out there. Do it in the morning. Open your hand in the evening. You don't know what'll work and what won't. You don't have that as a guiding principle. So you're just left to cast by faith and not be kept from casting by the wind and the waves and the potential or the perceived difficulty into which and in which you have to work. Look, we're here, this generation, in this world with all of its upheaval, yet the word still needs to be reached, and people still need to hear, and God still wants to use you and I. So let's stop making excuses for ourselves, and let's take what God's given us and lay it out there and watch Him work. He's more willing to work than you're willing to give what you have. Your call.